Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you also from my behalf for the invitation. It's really great to be part of this launch and this launch event and discussion. And Responsible Steel was already nicely touched upon, so it's good to continue from here with this topic. And as said, my name is Anna, and I work at the group sustainability at Outokumpu. And just to give you a little bit of a context before diving into the actual topic, we are a global stainless steel manufacturer with around 8,000 employees and manufacturing operations here in Europe and US and Mexico. And we also have our own chrome mine here in northern Finland. And you can imagine that with that own footprint and added with our complex supply chains, then the scope of sustainability topics that we work on, including climate, is really wide. We can have the next slide, please. So in my role, I currently lead our global work on human rights, but interestingly enough, my first task when I joined the company was to introduce Responsible Steel to our European operations. And this work is still ongoing and now towards the recertification. And ever since I started, I've been asked the recurring question on both internally and externally that what is actually the real value of responsible steel? And if we're being honest, it is a pretty comprehensive and resource-intensive framework, and many of the benefits, at least initially, can feel quite intangible or kind of difficult to point out, at least in euros, if we want to talk about monetary impact. But at the same time, I have observed that the corporate sustainability can easily remain vague in the sense that it becomes a set of ambitions and commitments, but then on the other hand, without clear ways how to verify, compare, or communicate about the actual performance. And now we can then have the next slide. And this is exactly where I then see that there's a strong connection on what we just heard from the scoreboard findings, that we see a growing ambition on the other hand and increasing demand for green steel. But at the same time, the performance is still a bit of fragmented and uneven. And to me, it looks like that this creates a kind of a practical challenge in the sense that even when we companies say that we are ambitious, we are not always speaking the same language. So that, for example, the concept of green steel, we talk about different definitions, we talk about different boundaries and different metrics. And as long as this stays at the level of presentations like the one we are having right now, I think this is a fairly manageable problem. But once green steel moves into truly into procurement decisions or contracts or investments and trade at large, then that lack of clarity, I think it might become more of a real problem by creating friction and slowing down decision making and increasing regulatory burden. And of course, there's the risk that claims are not trusted across markets. And that's why ambiguity can become very expensive. And as mentioned by Ninni, the scoreboard rightly emphasizes the importance of different supply chain levers, such as procurement, supplier engagement, and partnerships that Daniel also touched upon. But I think that to make those levers truly work at scale, they need something else, and that something else is trust. And then we get to the fundamental question that how do we turn ambition into something that is not only visible, but also trusted and comparable, so that both across companies and markets. And with this lengthy introduction, this is where the role of sustainability standards, such as Responsible Steel, becomes very concrete. So they are not just about compliance, but I think they are more about creating a shared reference point and also building trust between us progressive steelmakers and our customers. And therefore, the leading idea to my presentation on ambition needing assurance. And then we can move forward to the next slide. As I mentioned, that currently what has been missing in the steel transition is that shared reference point. And we really haven't had a globally consistent definition of responsibly manufactured steel or a way to compare performance across regions. And there has not been a way of conducting any independent verification. And then without that shared reference point, it obviously becomes fairly difficult to build trust in terms of sustainability claims. So now enters responsible steel, and the next slide, please. So that was really created to fill that gap, and it provides us a global multi-stakeholder standard, including the independent certification. And most importantly, it covers the full range of different sustainability issues. And one of the reasons why I joined Outokumpu was the fact that we wanted to launch this certificate since it is a very robust one with the multi-stakeholder approach that besides the steel value chain, you have the different civil society members and experts involved around the same table, making decisions on the contents of the standard, making it a bit lengthy and detailed, but then again, that builds on the credibility of this approach. So it is a very rigorous framework, and it's also globally applicable for companies working operating worldwide. And it really helps us to define what is good in terms of sustainable steel production. And the current situation, if we take the next slide, with responsible steel, this is something that I've also been often asked that how widespread is it? The initiative was launched 2015 and the first standard 2019. Currently, there are 90 certified sites across the globe, and my kind of hypothesis, if you look at the geographical spread, is that there might be some benefits of unified EU-level sustainability regulation that you can start building on your beyond compliance approach, since it is so far has been pretty European-based, but as said, spreading across the globe. We are the only ones in Finland and Sweden having certified sites, and then out of the German sites, 2 of them are ours. And then if we take the next slide, as said, responsible steel includes various aspects of sustainability, and I like to call them as the building blocks of steel industry sustainability performance. If we talk about ESG, then you have the 3 letters presented here. So a robust set of governance principles, but then also social principles, highlighting also the importance of stakeholder engagement and communication and local communities. And on the environmental principles, of course, starting with the climate aspects, and then more basic environmental management topics, and then water stewardship, having the also more of a stakeholder-related approach on managing water issues and biodiversity as the 4th element of environmental requirements. And I think this is really, really valuable approach, since we all know that sustainability is broader than carbon. And if we only focus on climate emissions, there's the risk of shifting the problem rather than solving it. For example, if we talk about the minerals that are needed for green transition, they are often extracted in areas where land use or community impacts or human rights risks are already present. And as Ninni mentioned, this is also reflected in the scoreboard, in the sense that climate is at the core, but also other environmental impacts included, and more importantly, pointing towards the need to also consider the social aspects which I strongly welcome, because then the sustainable transition must not be only about low carbon, but also socially responsible to truly happen. All right, that was a little bit of from Responsible Steel, what it is and what it contains. Sometimes a bit of a surprise to my colleagues as well internally when discussing the scope. Then we can move forward. So far, this was more of a theoretical approach to responsible steel as a concept and a system. But next, I would like to make this a bit more concrete and share a little bit about how we've approached responsible steel at Outokumpu and what our certification journey has looked like and what kind of learnings we've had, because it is really a kind of a not just adopting a standard to get a certificate, but more of a multi-year journey of continuous learning, how to turn this framework into our own operations. And probably needless to say, that journey is still ongoing. And if we then take the next slide, that gives a little bit of a timeline. We joined Responsible Steel 2019, and then I joined Outokumpu 22. We spent the second half of that year by getting introduced to the concept and conducting the self-assessments and stage 1 audits as the readiness check to see what is our maturity against the requirements. And then in the first half of 23, we had the actual on-site audits and did a lot of work related to the audit process, which also includes local stakeholder feedback and then worker interviews and interviewing other externals working at our sites. So you really get this kind of a triangular method of getting different views instead of the standard questionnaire and related evidence. Then the administrative work related to our audit reports, since we had only 2 reports combining all the 7 sites, it took a longer time to get them through and accepted or approved. So, and in 24 we then got the certificates were finally issued, and as the process goes, then after 1.5 years after getting the certificates, then we conducted the surveillance audits last year, just to make sure that we are keeping up with the speed. And our certificates will now expire early next year. So now we are in the process of getting prepared for the recertification process. We can then move on to the hopefully a bit of a more interesting part, which is then about the different learnings related to this concept. And as I said, for us, Responsible Steel is not just a kind of an external label, but it's very much of a management tool for us. And here are some of the key learnings from that perspective. And to begin with, one of the biggest realizations to me has been that Responsible Steel really forces you to look at sustainability in a much more structured and holistic way than you might have used to. And do remember that this was time before CSRD and the ESRS standards, but we got a really good kind of a general rehearsal or dress rehearsal for that purposes. But firstly, Responsible Steel has clearly strengthened our governance and accountability related to sustainability topics, not just having new instructions or policies, but really increasing the awareness at various organizational levels. And topics that have usually sat more within us and other sustainability-related teams have now become kind of a part of a clear, they require now clear ownership and defined responsibilities and regular management reviews. And that has put things forward in many ways. And secondly, Responsible Steel has helped us to improve our performance and also understand and manage it better. And now I don't mean only quantitative data, which is more again about CSRD reporting processes, but really through creating a shared view internally on what good looks like from our perspective. And ResponsibleSteel also identifies gaps very concretely, both at local and group level. And as this is a bit of an ongoing process, all the time something going on or some mid-review to be prepared, then it has really helped us to turn the audit thinking into continuous improvement and internal learning. And then thirdly, ResponsibleSteel has been very important in building organizational capability. There has been clearly an increase in awareness regarding different sustainability topics and understanding their relevance, and also kind of recognizing the role different stakeholders and engaging with them and local communities and what it means to us, because we are often pretty big and significant players locally in the societies we operate in, and many of the topics we deal with related to sustainability cannot be managed only through our internal processes. And ResponsibleSteel also helps us to translate the different high-level commitments into practical site-level actions, which is really a benefit as well. So it has kind of helped us to move from framework to execution and make the sustainability operational across the organization. And then if we move forward, I have a couple of thoughts from the value creation perspective, so that, as said, ResponsibleSteel has helped us to structure, manage, and operationalize sustainability. But that's only the one part of the story. And then the real question, and then the more difficult one, is then that how does this all translate to external value? And then kind of linking back to what Daniel already mentioned. And really, I think that assurance creates, but even more emphasis on the fact that it has the potential to create real market value. And we are still at the stage where many of these benefits are emerging rather than fully realized, and really that how to turn sustainability performance into something that is clearly understood and valued in the market, and that is definitely not always most straightforward thing to do and conceptualize. But what ResponsibleSteel has given us is verified sustainability performance, allowing us to demonstrate with independent evidence how we perform across different sustainability topics. And this is increasingly important because our customers, investors, different rating agencies, they are all asking for credible and traceable information, not just the commitments. Secondly, ResponsibleSteel supports to enable concrete advantages related to customer finance and governance discussions. We see this in meeting different supplier sustainability requirements and supporting sustainable procurement. And then there's also the potential linkage to sustainability-related financing. But this is probably a kind of still a developing territory, in the sense that translating a comprehensive framework like ResponsibleSteel into something that is simple or digestible enough for procurement decisions or commercial discussions is not always easy. But we're working on that as well. And then thirdly, ResponsibleSteel, as already mentioned, supports our stakeholder engagement and regulatory alignment, so that we really better understand the aspects related to community engagement, for example, and helping us to navigate through various regulatory requirements. CSRD already mentioned, but then also the different legislation related to due diligence, for example. So I think the one way to put it is then that it helps us to reduce fragmentation between different expectations. And then closing my part is that, as said, it has helped us to turn sustainability into commercial advantage, not alone, but a very useful tool in working towards that direction. And then we can have the next slide, please? So the Scoreboard report was very interesting to read, and it shows clearly that the ambition is growing and likewise demand is emerging. But really, the risk today is really not the lack of ambition as such, but the fragmentation on different definitions, claims, and the level of credibility. And when I was thinking about reading the report and thinking about how this is all linked to responsible steel, then I thought about that. What really matters is confidence, and I don't mean confidence in individual claims, but in the system behind them. And what standards like responsible steel can provide is definitely not a shortcut, but kind of a way to organize this complexity. So if, and hopefully we all do, want a transition that is both green and just, then ambition alone is not enough, but we need assurance to make it real. And for that purposes, responsible steel is a valuable tool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think we have some questions and comments for both to Daniel and Anna.
Yes, we'll start with the question to Anna from Christian Scheible from European Environmental Bureau. He asks, would you agree that the Responsible Steel Standard version 2.1.1 is still quite vague on many parameters, e.g. on Principle 11 and 12, and they would need further measurable performance benchmarks? What say you, Anna?
Yes, in the sense, but I think there's also the kind of balancing, as it's a global approach, that how much of measurable requirements you would, or kind of targets set within it, you would actually, how much would that benefit as a whole? But they are currently revising the standard so that as it is also evolving as things and measurement systems and related frameworks evolve. But then on the other hand, it kind of takes into account the different circumstances in different parts of the world where you operate in. But of course, then it's good that it provides a kind of a rigorous background enough if you think about, for example, comparability, but then you need to know what you compare. So definitely always room for improvement in that sense. And they are also actually now cross-checking with CSRD and due diligence requirements and different pieces of legislation to get that package aligned as well. So I'm pretty sure that will be mirrored in the next version of the standard.